Okay, day 21. A lot of really meaty stuff you can sink your teeth into this one, man. If you've been the ones thinking that Assange is some paranoid, crazy guy, oh boy, you'd better listen to this one. Murray laments that Chomsky's statements about this case was just rapidly fired into the court record in a matter of 4 minutes without examination, question, or placing into the context of legal arguments about political extradition. I'm not really going to get into that because Chomsky himself isn't really relevant to this case. He's not a witness or anything. I think this is more like an amicus curiae brief or something like that. But the main thing are these two witnesses who are unnamed because they have to stay anonymous for fear of retaliation. But their reading only got 20 minutes. Even though they established that the CIA, operating through Sheldon Adelson, made plans to spy on, kidnap, and even poison Assange. And not only spied on Assange, but his lawyers, including confidential lawyer-client discussions, which is incredibly illegal. And they even went so far as to burgle the offices of his Spanish lawyers, Baltasar Garzon. And Murray says this evidence went unchallenged and untested. And I'm going to go through Kevin Gosztola for the first witness. Witness number 1 is how he's officially known. And then for witness number 2, Murray posts his entire statement, so I'll read excerpts from it. It's 9 pages long, so I won't read the whole thing, but just hit the highlights and really let you know the enormity of what happened. But Gosztola mentions this is all around UC Global, the Spanish security company which engaged in an espionage operation against Julian Assange while he was in the Ecuador embassy. Ironically, the case against Julian Assange is one of espionage. That irony did not escape me, but a lot of this was around UC Global director David Morales, and witnesses number 1 and number 2 are 2 former employees that gave evidence in an earlier case. The Spanish court granted them anonymity and protection, given the threat of retaliation from Morales. Judge Bereitzer respected the decision of the Spanish court and deemed it was appropriate to allow the witnesses to remain anonymous during extradition proceedings. So witness number 1 informed the court that as of October 15, their work for the Ecuador government was practically the company's sole contract. And they were supposed to be providing security services for the daughters of then-president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa. A second contract was signed after for security at the Ecuador embassy in London. Ecuadorian security personnel had to travel to the UK and experienced difficulties obtaining a visa. UC Global, on the other hand, had employees with Spanish nationality who were able to move freely and reside in the UK by virtue of their EU citizenship. And witness number 1 also testifies that Morales traveled to Las Vegas for a security sector trade fair. This was in July of 2016, and insisted witness number 1 not accompany him. He obtained a contract with Las Vegas Sands, the casino owned by Sheldon Adelson, who was a major bankroller of President Trump's campaign. The contract was apparently intended to conceal an agreement with U.S. intelligence. Witness number 1 said Morales returned and told employees he had switched to the dark side, referring to cooperating with U.S. authorities. And as a result of that collaboration, the Americans will get us contracts all over the world. Such a cushy deal when you get in bed with the American government. All right, so again, I'll be reading from Witness 2's statements, and that's posted over on Murray's blog. You can also read Chomsky's statement there if you want. But anyway, Witness 2 says in part, I joined UC Global in 2015. The sole administrator and director of UC Global has always been David Morales. I remember that after David Morales had returned from the United States, at a meeting with the rest of the staff, he affirmed that we were moving into the Premier League. After this, I became aware that David Morales was making regular trips to the United States, the context of which my boss, David Morales, repeated to his having gone to the dark side. On 24 January 2017, once Donald Trump had acceded to the presidency of the United States, David Morales sent a message over Telegram in which he wrote, Well, I want you to be alert because I am informed that we are being vetted, so everything that is confidential should be encrypted. That's what I'm being told. Everything relates to the UK issue. I am not worried about it, just be alert. The people vetting are our friends in the USA. At the time, I didn't understand why Morales was asking me to be careful, but over time, this message made more sense. I possess these messages as evidence. And I won't read out every time he says it, but he says over and over again that he actually has evidence to back up everything he's saying. So I also recall that once Donald Trump won the elections at the end of 2016, the collection of information intensified as Morales became more obsessed with obtaining as much information as possible. Hence, I recall that between June and July 2017, I was summoned by David Morales to form a task force of workers at our headquarters in Jerez. The purpose of this unit was to execute, from a technical perspective, the capture, systemization, and processing of information collected at the embassy that David Morales requested. Morales indicated to the task force, of which I was a member, that the contract with Ecuador required that the cameras had to be changed every 3 years. This made no sense to me, because the contract had been in force for longer than 3 years, and the clause had not been fulfilled to date, although I was not aware of the clause. I considered that its existence was not a reasonable justification. The circuit that was in operation at the time consisted of CCTV security cameras, which obviously did not record sound, were sufficient to provide physical security against intrusion inside the building. Morales asked me explicitly, in my role as a member of the task force, to contact providers that sell security cameras with sophisticated audio recording capabilities. He even indicated that, insofar as possible, the cameras should not show that they are recording sound, or at least that the appearance of the cameras should not show they are recording sound. In early December 2017, I was instructed by David Morales to travel with a colleague to install the new security cameras. I carried out the new installation over the course of several days. I was instructed by Morales not to share information about the specifications of the recording system and, if asked, to deny that the cameras were recording audio. I was told that it was imperative that these instructions be carried out as they came, supposedly from the highest spheres. In fact, I was asked on several occasions by Mr. Assange and the political counselor Maria Eugenia whether the new cameras recorded sound, to which I replied they did not, as my boss had instructed me to do. Thus, from that moment on, the cameras began to record sound regularly so that every meeting that the asylee held was captured. At our offices in UC Global, it was mentioned that the cameras had been paid for twice by Ecuador and the United States, although I have no documentary evidence to corroborate this assertion. Around June 2017, while I was sourcing providers for the new camera equipment, David Morales instructed that the cameras should allow streaming capabilities so that our friends in the United States, as Morales explicitly put it, would be able to gain access to the interior of the embassy in real time. This request alarmed me greatly, and in order to impede the request, I claimed that remote access via streaming the camera circuit was not technically achievable. Morales continued to insist that we must proceed to open the circuit for the Americans, and soon after, Morales emailed me a PowerPoint document. This document was in English and contained instructions in minute detail of how to capacitate the system for remote access via streaming. Obviously, Morales did not have such technical knowledge, so the document must have been supplied by a third party. I suspect that it could have been U.S. intelligence, given that it was in English. Once more, I refused, this time alleging that it was manifestly illegal and therefore could not be a requirement of the contract, while also attempting to persuade Morales as a means of dissuading him that this would clearly be discovered by Mr. Assange, as I knew that this argument would restrain Morales. I did this because I did not want to collaborate in an illegal act of this magnitude. In addition to this, around January 2018, David Morales asked me to travel to London to install microphones in the embassy. I asked him if it was legal. Morales responded that he was the boss, that the responsibility fell on him, he was the one with knowledge of the contract, and who was responsible for the security. Morales instructed me to place a microphone in the meeting room, placed in the PVC holder of the fire extinguisher in the meeting room, where it was glued to a magnet and then concealed at the base of the PVC plastic. Further to this, David Morales asked me to install another microphone in the toilet at the end of the embassy, a place that had become strategic because Mr. Assange, who suspected that he was the subject of espionage, maintained many of his meetings there in order to preserve confidentiality. I also challenged Morales on this instruction, to which Morales responded that he was the boss and the person who knew the elements of security that had to be installed in order to fulfill the contract. I used a nearby socket to conceal a microphone and a cable in the toilet in the back of the embassy. As evidence of this, I possessed the microphone that was installed in the meeting room. In respect of the microphone that was installed in the toilet, this was never removed and may still be there. I also have several recordings captured by the microphones. The recordings show that the microphones recorded continuously. Furthermore, I also possess photos of the fire extinguisher from the meeting room of the embassy, which carried the magnetized microphone concealed by the PVC base in which it was placed. I also have numerous pictures of the ladies' bathroom, which were taken in order to determine which elements could be used to place a microphone. So, you know how everyone was going on about, Assange is just this insane paranoiac. He thinks people are planting microphones all around him. Well, guess what? People were planting microphones all around him. You're not paranoid if they really are out to get you. So witness number 2 also said, when I returned in January 2018, David Morales commented openly that our American friends had asked him to install microphones throughout the embassy, but they asked him to carry out this task himself without anyone's help. This was when I realized that the 2 microphones that had been installed already had been deployed as part of Morales' dealings with U.S. intelligence and that he had deceived me in order to have me install them. Specifically, Morales told several staff, among them myself, that he intended to place the microphones in all the fire extinguishers in the embassy attached with a magnet to the PVC base of the fire extinguishers, the reasoning of which was that, given that fire extinguishers were needed in each of the rooms of the embassy, this way one could be introduced in the room occupied by the asylee, Mr. Assange, which would allow the entire embassy to be bugged. Once again, I challenged Morales on the legality of these measures and tried to dissuade Morales, indicating that, in addition to it being completely illegal, installing microphones at this scale would be discovered for sure, to attempt to dissuade him from carrying out such a crazy act. As a result, and as far as I am aware, this plan was not executed. David Morales indicated that the purpose of installing the microphones, as per the request of the United States, was for the microphones and cameras which were situated in places like the meeting room to record the meetings that Assange has with his visitors, but especially those of his defense attorneys and, very specifically, the coordinator of his legal defense, Baltazar Garzon. Morales subsequently stated that gathering information on Garzon should be prioritized. The security guards at the embassy were requested to search for evidence of travels to Argentina and Russia. Oh, always gotta work Russia into it somehow, don't they? In Garzon's passport papers, which were photographed. Morales also indicated that the aim was that the surveillance, control of information, and recordings should focus on the meetings of the asylee, especially those in which he was meeting with his lawyers, who were priority targets, so the security personnel that were physically deployed in the embassy were specifically asked to monitor these meetings of Assange with his lawyers, as this was required by our U.S. friends. I am aware that at one point David Morales asked the security personnel employed by UC Global who were deployed inside the embassy to obtain Mr. Assange's fingerprints. As far as I am aware, his fingerprints were obtained from his imprint on a glass used by Mr. Assange. The information relating to the asylee's fingerprints were then handed to David Morales. I am also aware that the security personnel at the embassy stole documentation from Mr. Assange. A calligraphic analysis was commissioned, which David Morales also obtained. It is clear to me that both the fingerprints and the calligraphic report must have been requests from U.S. intelligence to David Morales. In the same trip in December 2017, in which I installed the new cameras, oh, pay attention to this one, you're gonna love it. David Morales asked me to steal a nappy of a baby. Yes, a diaper, which, according to the company's security personnel deployed at the embassy, regularly visited Mr. Assange. And the context here makes it plain that he's talking about a dirty diaper. Morales stated that I had to steal the nappy in order to establish whether the baby was a child of the asylees. On this occasion, Morales expressly stated that the Americans were the ones who wanted to establish paternity. Confronted with this situation, when I arrived in London, rather than execute what had been asked of me by Morales, I approached the mother of the infant outside the embassy and indicated that she should not bring the child into the embassy because there was a plan to steal the baby's nappies to establish whether the child was Julian Assange's. Oh man, I can see how you tell this to a third party who doesn't know anything about it. And you say, yes, he was afraid to have his child come in, because they were afraid that U.S. intelligence was going to steal his dirty diapers. Yeah, that sounds insane, right? You'd probably be reasonable in concluding that that guy's off his freaking rocker. But guess what? It's true. It actually happened. And check out this next part too. I swear it is straight out of a spy movie. Listen to this. In January 2018, Morales told me that for my next visit to the Embassy of Ecuador in London, I should place certain stickers on all the external windows of the embassy. Specifically, he requested that I place them in the top left corner of all the windows. The stickers were rather rigid. They indicated that CCTV was in operation. I found this strange because there had been a closed circuit system for several years, and it didn't make sense now to have to advertise this on the windows of the embassy. Nonetheless, during my visit to London, I placed the stickers that had been supplied in the upper left-hand corner of the windows of the embassy, following the instructions of David Morales. When I returned to Jerez, Morales explained that our American friends had laser microphones outside the embassy which were directional and pointed at the windows and extracted noise, allowing them to capture all conversations. This actually exists because when you've got sound going on inside the room, it actually vibrates the glass in the windows. And these laser microphones are pointed right into the glass, and they can pick up even the most minute vibrations in the glass. And they can use that to extract sound. I mean, it's total spy movie stuff, but it really exists. However, as Morales stated openly, due to the fact that Mr. Assange used a white noise machine to make it difficult to obtain sound recordings, which produced a vibration in the window that stopped the sound being extracted via the laser microphone which U.S. intelligence had installed outside. Thus, Morales had revealed when I returned that those stickers, which had been supplied by our American friends, having been placed in the upper left-hand side of each of the windows, eliminated the vibration, allowing the laser microphones to point the stickers to extract conversations. And there were various targets that the security personnel were instructed to pay special attention to. Among them, special attention had to be given to Mr. Assange's lawyers. Way illegal. The security personnel had to write detailed profiles of these targets, photographing their documentation, the electronic equipment that had to be left at the entrance of the embassy, and as far as possible, the visitors' conversations with the asylee listened to. Yes, confidential attorney-client communications. In some cases, this involved following them, tracking their every move, and carrying out detailed reports of each of the visits of these targets, which had to be immediately sent back to the headquarters of UC Global in Jerez. And he was also told that the contents of an iPad belonging to one of Assange's lawyers had been copied. By the way, I have no idea if this witness is a he or a she. I'm just saying he, just out of convenience, but I don't know. The identity is being completely covered up just to avoid any retaliation, particularly from Morales, who sounds like a very dangerous individual. But anyway, he or she says, I also recall Morales saying in the office that the Americans were very nervous about a Californian politician who was going to the Embassy of Ecuador in London to meet with Mr. Assange. According to Morales, the Americans had asked Morales to personally control and monitor absolutely everything that had to do with that visit. Thus, from the company's headquarters in Jerez, I recall that Morales gave an explicit order to the security personnel to record everything that occurred during that visit. I recall that at the end of November 2017, David Morales told the company workers that the Americans were very happy with the information that we had supplied, but that they would need more. To this end, Morales spoke about the possibility of entering the legal offices of ILOCAD, the law firm which is headed by Baltasar Garzon in Madrid, given that Mr. Garzon coordinated the legal defense of Julian Assange. This would allow us to obtain information concerning Mr. Assange for the Americans. 2 weeks after this conversation, the national media reported that men in balaclavas had entered Garzon's law offices. Yes, that really happened. Not a paranoid conspiracy theory. Entered into court via witness testimony, and the prosecutors didn't even try to oppose it. All the requests of surveillance, following and capturing communications in relation to Baltasar Garzon came from the Americans, according to David Morales. Garzon was a primary objective because of the fact that he was Julian Assange's defense attorney. I recall that on one occasion in Jerez de la Frontera at the UC Global headquarters around December 2017, David said that the Americans were desperate and that they had even suggested that more extreme measures should be employed against the guest to put an end to the situation of Assange's permanence in the embassy. Specifically, the suggestion that the door of the embassy could be left open, which would allow the argument that this had been an accidental mistake, which would allow persons to enter from outside the embassy and kidnap the asylee. Even the possibility of poisoning Mr. Assange was discussed. Obviously, we employees were shocked at these suggestions and commented amongst ourselves that the course that Morales had embarked on was beginning to become dangerous. And he also mentions that they installed an FTP server to collect all of this information for transfer, and the server was accessed remotely from an American IP address. And he says, later on, David Morales asked for this FTP server to be replaced by an online web database, which could be accessed remotely via username and password. And going back to the cameras that had been installed, he says, in fact, on a couple of occasions, Ecuadorian authorities requested a recording, which meant that David Morales had to travel to the United States to ask for the original recordings. So they didn't even have the recordings. The originals had been sent to the United States. So who are they really working for? And he says, during these months, between mid-2017 and mid-2018, when the contract with UC Global came to an end, David Morales displayed a noticeable increment in his assets. He acquired a new home, the value of which I do not know, but I estimate could cost approximately €1 million. He also acquired high-end vehicles. In the company, it was stated that he was paid €200,000 a month by the United States. Well, he seems to have made out all right. Pretty nice pay for betraying every single principle of justice. He's certainly doing a lot better than those of us who are reporting on this, I'll tell you that much for sure. Which is why Murray ends every blog post with an appeal for money, and I end each one of these recordings with a similar appeal because, all of this needs to get around. So please share this, hit like, subscribe, and the bell. Please leave a comment because it feeds the algorithm. And also, please consider giving what you can at donate.bogosity.tv. Even if it's just a few pennies in crypto, every little bit helps. So thank you very much. Until next time, stay strong and be free.